Mark walked slowly down the street, looking around from time to time. Being a tramp, he fully justified the statement that the wolf's legs feed him. Behind his back, the guy was carrying a small cart, putting into it whatever came his way, but only what could bring him benefit or monetary gain. For the most part, these were cardboard, bottles, or scrap metal, which were becoming more and more difficult to find every day. Recently, Mark's favorite place has become a spontaneous landfill that formed in front of a bulky auto repair shop building. Empty boxes and some broken parts were often thrown out there. All this was of great value to Mark. There was also a river flowing nearby, where, if you wanted and chose a quieter place, you could swim and even catch fish. Although he wasn't much of a fisherman, more often than not, the catch was only enough for a couple of stray cats to kill a worm, and everything would have been fine, except that the manager of the auto repair shop couldn't stand those who lived on the street. As soon as he saw Mark near the gate, Jason began shaking the air with his fists and threatening him with immediate violence. "If you show up here again, blame yourself. There's no point snooping around here. Otherwise, I know you. You'll just be looking to sneak something away on the quiet." At such moments, Mark always left, not wanting to escalate the situation and incur the hatred of the rich man. But then he invariably returned, as if something was pulling him. Most likely, that very spontaneous dump was attracting, where there was a whole Klondike of useful finds for the tramp. Therefore, he never left the car service building for long. So first he will make a couple of circles around the surrounding streets and will certainly return. The manager had threatened to crush Mark's sides more than once, but he didn't care. Why is he scrubbing off here? It's just like it's been smeared with honey by God. Something else good will stick his nose where it is not needed. Although, what can he do? Jason thought. The strange tramp had been wandering around the auto repair shop for 2 weeks now, and during that time he had done nothing wrong. But the manager clearly did not like such a neighborhood, and therefore he did everything to ensure that the homeless man would leave these places forever. That evening, Mark decided to go fishing again. The young tramp was not even bothered by the fact that the sky was overcast, and there was a strong smell of rain in the air. Here and there, zigzags of lightning flashed, accompanied by deafening peals of thunder. Most people are afraid of the elements, but Mark was not like that. The young tramp seemed to be challenging nature itself, wanting to fight with it. Since it was summer, the rain was not at all scary for Mark. Not far away, in a coastal forest belt, he had a small shack, cobbled together from all sorts of scraps at hand. Despite its modest equipment, Mark's home did an excellent job of protecting it from rain and wind. The thunderstorm and lightning had already broken up in earnest, but the guy did not lose heart, realizing that there was clearly no need to be upset. Perhaps the rain will pass by, as has happened more than once. It's okay if the fishing doesn't go well, at least I'll catch some crayfish. If only the rain wouldn't interfere, Mark thought. At that moment, the first heavy drop fell next to him, raising an invisible cloud of dust. Well, it has begun. I can't see any fish today. As if to confirm his words, a zigzag of lightning pierced the sky again, accompanied by a deafening clap of thunder. The tramp was about to head to his hiding place when he noticed something strange. First, the noise of an engine was heard, and then a bulky SUV, resembling a gigantic beetle, stopped at the edge of the bridge. Mark became wary. Why is he parked here? Didn't he find another place? At that moment, the car door swung open, and the stranger in a black suit came out, looking around furtively. Looking around, he began to pull something out from the depths of the cabin. What exactly it was, Mark did not know. From the outside, it resembled either a carpet twisted in several layers or a bundle of things tied with rope. Having dragged his burden to the very edge of the bridge, the man took a breath, after which, with a strong and confident movement, he threw it into the river. Without taking his eyes off the stranger, Mark was very surprised by the haste of his actions. At that moment, lightning struck again over the young tramp's head, after which he involuntarily turned his gaze to the river. What appeared before Mark's eyes made him feel uneasy. In the stormy waters of the river, A young girl with long flowing hair desperately fought for her life. Mark didn't know why she didn't show signs of life earlier, allowing herself to be calmly thrown into the river. Without hesitation for a second, he rushed there. The water was relatively cool, but Mark didn't care. Despite the fact that the guy never considered himself a good swimmer, he was still able to cover the distance between him and the drowning woman in a matter of seconds. Unfortunately, the girl had already managed to disappear under the water, which is why he had to hold his breath and dive after her. An icy web of panic and fear immediately froze his lungs. He imagined that he would not be able to find the unfortunate stranger in the water column. Mark dived over and over again, trying to grab the hand of the girl going to the bottom. When the tramp dived for the third time, he finally succeeded. It was difficult to swim to the shore. The wet clothes were pulling down, but Mark tried not to think about it and rowed vigorously with his arms and legs. When they finally reached land, Mark was ready to collapse on the ground from fatigue. Kneeling down, he cleared his throat and then turned the girl on her side so that excess water could escape from her lungs. The stranger coughed and then opened her eyes. Since her dress involuntarily rode up above her knee, experiencing embarrassment, Mark decided to lower it lower. At that moment, he saw a long, arched scar running down from the outside of his thigh to his knee. Mark took a closer look and shuddered in surprise. The guy knew there could be no mistake. He had seen this scar a couple of times before. Mark shook his head, then pulled away sharply, trying to shake off the obsession that had gripped him. This simply cannot be. It all seems to me, the guy thought, trying not to look at the scar. Meanwhile, the stranger came to her senses and looked around. What happened to me? How did I end up in the river? Who are you? I'm Mark. And how you got into the river. It's better to ask your companion who threw you into the water, he explained with a calm look. Mark had already overcome the initial excitement and was able to pull himself together. The girl looked doubtfully at her savior, then added, My name is Alice. My fiancé and I were at a birthday party, and then I suddenly felt sick. I lost consciousness, woke up, and you were next to me. Yes, you have a good fiancé, nothing to say. Apparently, in this way, he wanted to quickly bring you to your senses. Mark tried to joke, but the joke came out inappropriate. Alice pursed her lips in an offended manner. Okay, don't be offended. I didn't do it on purpose. Let's go to my shack. You can dry off there, and then I'll take you home, Mark suggested. A smile crossed Alice's face. In her heart, she did not believe that some tramp could take her home. He probably doesn't have money for food either. Will he take you home? But it was no longer possible to confuse Mark. Taking her hand, he led Alice towards the nearest bushes where he had a hut. The rain, as the young homeless man expected, bypassed the city, scaring only with thunderstorms and lightning. Once in the shack, Alice felt a little awkward. She had never been to such places before, much less communicated with homeless people in person. But when Mark lifted the pile of laundry lying on the floor and took out a brand new thermos, she became wary. This thing was clearly not cheap, and Mark definitely couldn't find it in a landfill. But what Alice saw a second later plunged her into a state of shock. It was an expensive smartphone lying on an empty beer crate that served as a chair for the tramp. At that moment, Alice realized that something was clearly wrong with this guy. She looked carefully into his eyes and saw slight sparkles in them, perfectly in harmony with the mockery on his thin lips. What, you were afraid that I would eat you? Of course not. It's all a circus, a fiction. You see, I'm not a tramp. I just need to figure out what's going on at my auto repair shop. So I dressed up as a beggar. The fact is that customers complain that instead of new parts, they are given old ones. And it seems that someone is taking the difference for themselves. So you're not homeless at all? Alice exclaimed in surprise. Mark shook his head. No, of course. In fact, I don't always spend the night in this shack. I just pretend that I always live here. And then in the dark I go home. I have a car parked nearby. Clean clothes and food are stored in it. Yes, there are a lot of things that a homeless person might need. Alice looked with respect at her savior, who in such a short time had turned from a homeless tramp into a businessman. The hot tea from the thermos made her noticeably warmer and stopped trembling. On top of that, Mark gave her a warm blanket in which she could wrap herself up. "Well, shall we go home? Or do you want to spend the night in a hobo's shack?" Mark asked with a smile. Alice appreciated the humor and was not offended at all. "No, of course, I will be much more comfortable at home. Although, what kind of comfort can we talk about when my parents died in an accident a year ago?" Mark nodded understandingly, although he himself was not an orphan. Soon they were already driving in his foreign car towards the girl's house. Suddenly, a very interesting thought occurred to Mark. "Listen, what if you don't come home?" "Well, to create the illusion that you are dead, and at this time we will decide what to do next." And Alice definitely liked the young businessman's proposal. She herself wanted to know why the groom decided to get rid of her in such a terrible way. Since Mark's house was not small, he gave Alice a bedroom for guests. He himself took a shower and, putting on a robe, went to his office, where he began studying the even statements for the quarter. During these 2 weeks that Mark monitored the network of his car repair shops, he was able to identify the weak link located in this particular car service center. Its manager was a young guy, Jason, who once swore his allegiance to Mark and promised to increase his profits several times, but instead began to deceive the boss and install old parts while at dismantling sites for car owners. But he took the money to buy new ones for himself. All this had a downside, since the quality of service in Mark's auto repair shops noticeably deteriorated. People no longer believed that they could really get help in this place. That night, Mark stayed up late. The guy still couldn't get the thought of that strange scar on the rescued woman out of his head. Where had he seen it before? At that moment, Mark's consciousness clouded, transporting him many years ago, to the time when he was a high school student. Then, together with a group of peers, young Lyosha was returning home from school. At some point, one of the guys suggested going to an abandoned construction site, intending to shoot with slingshots at the ubiquitous cawing crows. Such places always attract children of any age, imagining that they are exploring an ancient castle, and not the skeleton of an unfinished building. When the guys entered the first floor, they immediately heard someone's muffled groan. Turning his head to the left, 10-year-old Lyosha saw a girl lying on the concrete floor. Her right leg was bloody, and a piece of broken glass lay nearby, which apparently injured her leg. Most likely the girl, just like them, snuck into this construction site in search of adventure, but instead got herself into trouble. Seeing the blood, Lyosha's peers immediately scattered, and only he remained in place. He helped her bandage the wound with a piece of a torn shirt sleeve, and then ran for help. It just so happened that Mark didn't even know her name, but the sight of that arc-shaped cut was forever etched in his memory, and now he saw him again. Having decided not to tell Alice about this for the time being, Mark went to bed in order to begin solving his problems in the morning. The young businessman slept poorly and woke up at dawn. Having made himself some coffee, he sat down in a chair and waited for his guest to wake up. To his surprise, Alice did not keep him waiting, and she came out within 10 minutes. After thinking about everything that happened that night, she decided to contact the police. Mark supported her because he knew that dealing with such a suitor was mortally dangerous. Having hastily had breakfast, he took Alice to the nearest police station, and he himself went to a car service center, where he intended to carry out a personnel purge. Jason greeted his boss at the gate with a joyful smile and immediately showered him with compliments. But when Mark informed the manager about his dismissal, the smile slowly faded from his face. "How is this possible? For what, Mark Igorovich?" Jason muttered offendedly. "And because you hid money from me, while you installed old parts for clients to replace those that had fallen into disrepair. Because of this, the reputation of my service has become very low," the businessman explained in an icy tone. The manager tried to say something else in his own defense, but then realized the futility of his attempts, especially when Mark said that he had been monitoring the car service under the guise of a tramp for about 2 weeks. At this very time, Alice was already giving evidence at the nearest police station. On the same day, her fiancé Steve was detained and almost immediately confessed. Money turned out to be to blame for everything, or rather, not the money itself, but the inheritance received by Alice after the death of her parents. A cunning swindler secretly slipped sleeping pills into the girl's birthday party, after which he deliberately took the bride away from the event under the pretext that he would take her home himself, but instead took her to the river, deciding to drown her. Subsequently, Steve hoped to testify in favor of the fact that Alice refused his services and went home on foot. But the most important surprise awaited Alina yet to come. When Mark told her about the incident at the construction site, she smiled and looked at Mark with gratitude. "Lord, I didn't even realize that this could happen in life. You saved me again. Looks like you are my guardian angel." Mark's face broke into a satisfied smile. "Come on, stop it. Which angel am I? It just so happened that you decided to swim that very evening, and I decided to play a tramp." The young people laughed together and then headed towards the parked car. Those who met Alice and Mark on their way took them for a couple in love, which of course was not entirely true. Although looking at the perky sparkle in Mark's eyes, one could make the wildest assumptions. It took Mark and Alina about a year before they realized that they wanted to tie the knot. During this time, Mark put things in order in the business and now intended to expand the network of his auto repair shops. Alina put her parents' money in the right direction and opened a small enterprise for sewing fashionable clothes, in which she acted as the owner and chief fashion designer rolled into one. And 9 months after the celebration, the couple became parents, holding their little son Jacob in their arms. Rumor has it that Alice and Mark often walk with the baby in the fresh air, not forgetting to visit the bank of the river that once brought them together under very strange circumstances.